everybody. How are you? It's Black History Month. Just give me a minute to just get other people to see this by sharing on my page, please. Feel free to like and follow Phenomenal STEMist on Facebook, as well as on Instagram. Feel free to look at all of my other older videos on YouTube, as well as phenomenalstemist.com. I have lots of videos of different interviews of scientists, engineers, physicians that are currently working. So I did that last year. If you want to have your kids take a look at that, feel free to visit www.phenomenalstemist.com, or you can go straight to my YouTube channel, and that's where I have those interviews. But today we're talking about famous or I'm basically celebrating, they may not have been famous, but I'm celebrating African-American technologists and engineers. For the most part, I'm focusing on the engineers. We'll start with my favorite. His name is Lewis Latimer. Lewis Latimer was basically an apprentice. He worked for Alexander Graham Bell. He also worked for Thomas Edison. So these are famous people who get all the credit for the telephone and the light bulb. Right? When you think of the light bulb, we're taught about Thomas Edison, Con Edison. When we think about the phone, you think about Alexander Graham Bell. But the way science works in general is they have people scientists, we call them the principal investigator. These are the ones who are running the laboratory. Though they get all the credit for a lot of these things, truly it is their apprentices who do pretty much a lot of the work. So when I was a scientist, I was a postdoc. So after you finish your PhD, you have to work in a lab underneath a principal investigator. It's called a postdoctoral fellow. And the principal investigator wrote the grants, kept the lab running, but the people who were actually doing many of the experimental work were not the PIs, as we would call them. So one of the biggest issues of the light bulb back in the 1800s, when they were first trying to create light outside of the sun and outside of kerosene, they couldn't make it last long. So back in the days before there were light bulbs, there were kerosene lamps, or people just went to bed at night. That's I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. I think we should have just, it's good just to go to bed at night. But the reason why we're able to keep going all through the night is because of the light bulb. Well, it was Lewis Latimer, an engineer, who basically discovered what it would take to make the light bulb burn for a longer period of time. He devised a way of encasing a certain filament within a cardboard envelope. And that's what made it, it's the filament that he designed that we see even now today, that created light bulbs to last for long periods of time. And Edison became a rich man, but it was Lewis Latimer who solved the problem. He was also involved directly in the invention of the telephone, all right, helping to draft the design of the telephone. Lewis Latimer, remember him. Every time you turn on a light switch, remember Lewis Latimer. Every time you pick up one of these that you're constantly on, remember Lewis Latimer. He has all kinds of inventions. He improved the railroad car bathroom, and he had early air conditioning unit. Great engineer. All right. Someone who is pretty young, I decided to just go for people who are not necessarily famous. I'll just spotlight some people. So this is Stephanie Wilson. She graduated from Harvard and the University of Texas uh, with a bachelor's in engineering science and master's aerospace engineering, respectively. So she went to Harvard, got her bachelor's in engineering, and went to UT and did aerospace engineering. She is the first African American female engineer to go into space. So we commonly look at her name is blanking for me for right now. Hey Julian, thanks for joining. I can't remember her name right now. It's blanking, but we commonly look to her as the first African American female in flight. But she was actually a physician. She was a physician. Let me get her name. She was not an engineer. And so I think like she got some, I'm not saying that she didn't deserve to be there. I'm just saying she went through a different route to get opportunity, but she wasn't trained as an aerospace engineer, as an astronaut. So I want to get her name. Mae Jemison, yeah. So Mae Jemison, we glory her. That's great, but she was a physician. But this is actually a bona fide Harvard University grad aerospace engineer, first African American female to go into space. So special honors to her. Stephanie Wilson. All right. And I love Lonnie Johnson. Did you know about Lonnie Johnson? Lonnie Johnson received his nuclear engineering degree from Tuskegee University. Shout out to the historically Black university in Alabama. And he basically, I think, worked for other companies that dealt with pressure piping. I'm trying to remember his background, but ultimately he was creating. So what an engineer does, a lot of times engineers are the builders. They're the builders of things. Just to let you know, most engineers build things, whether they build things for software that are intricate for computers, or they build large structures for buildings, or they build structures that go in buildings. So I love this where he says, growing up in a segregated school, despite his precocious intelligence and creativity, he was told not to aspire beyond a career as a technician. And I feel like that's in segregation, but it's common now. It's common just as much, in my opinion, now as it was back in segregation, where, no offense to technicians, but technicians fix things. And everybody can be, I don't want to seem like I'm standing in judgment of technicians. But what happens is technicians are the fixers of things. Engineers are the builders of things. And I desire that more African Americans, period, be in charge of the building, versus we all focus our efforts short term into the technician. He said no. So he started to work at, I can't remember the company, but basically a lot of engineers work at defense companies. And they're dealing with these machines. And I believe he found out that he was working with a machine that had a high pressure push to it. It was spouting out fluid. And so he created a version of that for water guns. And he was the creator of the Super Soaker. The Super Soaker is an engineered device. I don't know if you grew up with me in my era, but that was like one of the biggest water guns. We loved water fights. I grew up in New York City, and we loved to water fight, especially when we went away on camping trips. That's a long time ago. But But we used to, shoot the gun, the water just spouts, sprinkle out. But this super soaker, man, this took in a lot of high pressure water and just gushed the water out. It was just a winner. And he deserved royalties, and he sued Nerf Company and was awarded $73 million after through the lawsuit they confirmed underpayment. He created it, and they made billions off of that thing, and they did not pay him well. And so he sued and won because he was the creator of the Super Soaker through his engineering skill. He didn't limit himself to fix. He decided he wanted to be the builder. All right, Lonnie Johnson. Honor to Lonnie Johnson. Okay, so here's someone who's not as popular. His name is Dr. Mark Dean, and he is a computer scientist and engineer. Computer scientist and engineer. So last week we talked about scientists and medical doctors, physicians, so biological scientists. And this week we're focusing on engineers and technicians. So he developed a lot of landmark technologies. He's low-key. Most Black engineers, especially in the computer science realm, so software engineers, I mean, they're making buku bucks, but they're really under the radar. Most people in general, most software engineers in general, other than your Bill Gates and your, the guy who created Apple, Tim Cook is the one who's running Apple right now. Most software engineers just go to work, enjoy the work, go home. But this man right here, he owns 3 of the 9 patents. So what is a patent? A patent is when you create something and you get intellectual property, meaning who you own it. You're the person who created it, and you're going to get credit for the creation of it, and anybody else who copies it or uses it must basically pay you or get permission from you. But the color monitor, right? So everybody has a PC now. I'm working on a laptop. It's color, but when the computers first came out, they were these large machines and they weren't personal. And then, they became a little bit smaller and personal, but they were black and white. So, but he basically helped in the development of the color monitor and certain types of chips. He could have stopped there, as many engineers do. They pretty much stop at a bachelor's in math and bachelor's in engineering, but he decided to go on and get his master's degree in electrical engineering from Florida Atlantic University. And then 10 years later, he went on to Stanford, which is one of the biggest universities in the country, probably number 2 in the country, definitely number 1 in terms of computer science and engineering. And he went to Stanford University in California and completed his doctorate. That's huge for computer scientists and engineer because, they don't have to. They can literally stop with a bachelor's with his great success of developing 3 patents. And he could have stopped there and made lots of money. But he wanted to further his education. His name is Dr. Mark Dean. Because of it. Honor to Dr. Mark Dean, one of the pioneers for the color printer in our computers. All right. Thanks so much. I hope I really try to just do small gamuts. Next week, we're going to focus on African-American scientists and mathematicians. So this week, we focused on engineers. Number 1, Dr. Mark Dean, right? Number 2, Lonnie Johnson, excellent engineer. Oops, sorry. Lonnie Johnson, excellent engineer. The one female in the group, I try to make sure I have at least one female every week. Stephanie Wilson, the first African American female engineer that went to space. Honor to her. Harvard graduate in engineering. And lastly, old school, Lewis Latimer. Without him, we would not have a light bulb or our precious cell phones. All right. I hope to see you guys next week. Next week is the last Sunday in February, and so I'm going to end with famous mathematicians and I believe computer scientists. Any questions? I only see one person watching me, Julian. Like I said before, feel free to see other videos of me interviewing real life engineers, physicians that are currently working in the field, in their fields, on my page, Dr. Maya Byfield YouTube, my YouTube page, or you can go to www.phenomenalstemist.com to see those videos. Next week, famous mathematicians and computer scientists. Good night.